Hello everyone, welcome to Sinister Prime. Since many of you listen to these stories to relax and drift off into dreams, I thought it would be wonderful to hear where you're tuning in from around the world. Let's begin the story. It was supposed to be a simple road trip, just me, the open road, and a few hours to clear my mind. After weeks of stress at work and a recent breakup, I needed the drive. It wasn't an adventurous trip by any means, just a straight shot down a desolate highway in the Midwest. I had done this drive a dozen times before. Nothing special about it. That was until I took the wrong turn. I was on Route 57, a quiet, forgotten stretch of highway surrounded by cornfields on both sides. The endless horizon stretched out before me, the road a thin line disappearing into the evening fog. The setting sun cast a deep orange glow, reflecting off the gray clouds rolling in. I could feel the storm coming. That was the last thing I needed. I must have been distracted, thinking about Sarah, thinking about how things had gone so wrong. One minute we were in love, and the next, it was like I was living with a stranger. Her cold eyes, the way her voice seemed to grow distant. Then the fights, always about nothing. My thoughts were eating me alive. I didn't notice the exit until I was already halfway down the ramp. The GPS rerouted, but something felt off. It was like I had crossed into a different place. The road became narrower, the trees denser. I hadn't seen a car in nearly half an hour, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, a creeping sense of isolation set in. No lights, no signs, just me and this forgotten road. It was then that I saw him. At first, I thought it was a deer, a dark silhouette standing in the middle of the road about 200 yards ahead, just barely visible through the mist. As I got closer, I could make out the shape. A man, just standing there. He was motionless, his back to me, wearing old dirty clothes that seemed out of place, like he had been walking for miles. I slowed down, debating whether I should stop, but something in my gut screamed not to. I wasn't the type to pick up hitchhikers, but what if he was hurt? Before I could make a decision, he turned around, slowly, almost unnaturally, as if he was expecting me. His face, God, I still remember his face. There was something deeply unsettling about it. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and his mouth hung open in a crooked grin. His skin looked wrong, pale and stretched too tight, like he was wearing a mask of someone else's face. I don't know why, but my foot slammed on the gas. Instinct took over, and I swerved around him, tires screeching. I glanced in my rearview mirror just long enough to see him still standing there, watching me, that twisted grin following me as I sped off. My heart was racing, palms slick on the steering wheel. I kept telling myself it was just a weirdo, probably drunk or high. But that didn't explain why every nerve in my body was screaming for me to get away. The road wound deeper into the woods, the fog growing thicker. My headlights barely cut through the swirling mist. I should have turned around, gone back to the main highway, but my pride, or stupidity, kept me pushing forward. Then my phone buzzed. I fumbled for it, hoping the GPS had figured out where the hell I was. No signal. Of course. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat in frustration, when suddenly the road in front of me seemed to drop off. My headlights illuminated a steep descent, a winding, treacherous hill that came out of nowhere. I had to slam on the brakes to avoid careening over the edge. As the car crept down the slope, I noticed something strange. The trees lining the road looked wrong, their branches twisted and gnarled like claws, the bark blackened and scorched in places. The fog was so thick now, it felt like I was driving through a cloud, the mist clinging to the car, almost suffocating. It wasn't just the trees. The air felt heavier, oppressive. Every sound seemed muffled, except for the constant, low hum of my engine. And the smell, an acrid metallic stench that made my stomach turn. It was like something was rotting in the air itself. That's when I saw the house. It appeared out of nowhere, nestled between two large oaks at the bottom of the hill. A dilapidated old farmhouse, its windows dark and shattered. The roof sagged, and the paint had long since peeled away, leaving the wood exposed to the elements. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades, but something about it felt alive, like it was watching me. I pulled the car to a stop in front of the house, not because I wanted to, but because I felt like I had to. There was no rational explanation. My heart pounded in my chest, every instinct screaming at me to leave, to get back on the road and never look back. But I couldn't. The door to the house creaked open, just a crack. And then, from the shadows, I saw him again. The man from the road, He was standing in the doorway, that same crooked grin plastered on his face. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. My body froze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't understand how he could have gotten here. I had left him miles back. There was no way he could have reached the house before me. But there he was. Without thinking, I threw the car into reverse, but the engine sputtered and died. Panic surged through me as I tried the ignition again and again. Nothing. I was trapped. The man stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. His movements were jerky, almost puppet-like. I could hear the crunch of gravel beneath his boots, the only sound in the suffocating silence. Then he spoke. "Get out." His voice was a rasp, dry and cracked, like it hadn't been used in years. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. I don't know why I listened. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was something else, something deeper, pulling at the edges of my mind, whispering that I had no choice. I opened the door and stepped out of the car. The air was thick with that rotten stench, making it hard to breathe. The ground felt unsteady beneath my feet, like it might give way at any moment. The man stopped a few feet from me, his head tilting slightly as he studied me. Up close, I could see the unnatural tightness of his skin, the way it seemed to stretch over his bones. His eyes were too wide, too white, and his grin never wavered. "Come inside," he said, turning and walking back toward the house. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, but my legs moved on their own. I followed him, my heart hammering in my chest. The door creaked wider as I approached, and the darkness inside swallowed me whole. The interior was worse than I had imagined. The walls were covered in grime. The floorboards creaked under my weight. The air was thick with the smell of decay. But it was the pictures that caught my attention. They lined the walls, dozens of them, old black and white photos in dusty frames. Each one was of the same man, different places, different times, but always the same man. That same crooked grin, that same unsettling stare. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. He just kept walking, leading me deeper into the house. We passed through a narrow hallway, the walls closing in around me, until we reached a door at the end. It was old, the wood splintered and rotting, but something about it felt final, like whatever was behind it would be the end of me. He opened the door, and I saw it. A room, small and dimly lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. In the center was a chair, and in the chair, another man, or what was left of him. His skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over his bones. His eyes were hollow, lifeless, and his mouth hung open in a silent scream. But the worst part was his face, or rather the lack of it. His face had been peeled off, and in its place, a new face had been crudely stitched on. The skin was too tight, the features mismatched. It was the face of the man who had led me here. I stumbled back, my stomach lurching as the realization hit me. The man, the thing in front of me, wasn't human. It was wearing someone else's face, and now it wanted mine. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind me, the walls closing in. I could hear its footsteps, slow and deliberate as it approached me. That same crooked grin stretched across its stolen face. I screamed, banging on the door, but there was no escape. The darkness swallowed me, and the last thing I felt was its cold, clammy hands gripping my face, pulling, tearing. Then nothing. I woke up in the hospital 2 days later. They said I had been found on the side of the road, unconscious. My car had crashed into a ditch. They told me it was a miracle I was alive. But I knew better. Every night since then, I see that face in my dreams. That twisted, crooked grin. And every morning I check the mirror, terrified that one day it won't be my reflection staring back. Because I know, deep down, it's still out there, waiting, watching, and someday it'll come for me again.